Hi, this is Matt Pullin, and welcome to Stonewall Legacy. Today, I'm going to talk about the defense e3, e6, bishop d3, knight to c6. And this is a line that someone played against me on the internet. I actually won the game because they didn't interpret the defense in a very aggressive way, but I think this is a very interesting path against the Stonewall. And the reason I'm calling this the Teichmann Defense is because the defense was first used in a game in London in 1901 between Lee and Teichmann. This is Richard Teichmann, possibly the greatest pirate chess master of all time. So this is Lee Teichmann, and after f4, the Stonewall-like move, Black responded with g5, and after knight to f3, Black exchanged, giving him the half-open g-file and White the half-open e-file. And after this, knight f6, Black simply develops a new piece with every turn. Bishop to d6, bishop d7, rook g8, queen e7, castles queenside. So Black has his rooks connected and all of his pieces are off the back rank. So White continues his build-up on the king side even though the black king is not over there. And now Black just moves his pieces backwards for 3 moves. Queen f8, bishop e8, bishop e7. And now he exchanges on e5 and pulls the knight back to d7, preparing to play c5. And now, all of a sudden, Black is dominating the center. So this defense with g5 is sort of radical. You don't see very many people playing this way today. Of course, White's play was not the best either. He should have switched plans when his opponent castled to the queenside. So I'm not going to finish this game. Teichmann won this game fairly easily. But I think this game is appropriate to give the Teichmann defense its name. So after f4, the Teichmann defense, Teichmann played g5. But I think that a more modern and interesting way to treat this defense is with knight to b4. Now, White can play this as though it were the Horowitz defense by playing knight to f6 and allowing Black to double the d-pawns. But the difference here is Black can play c5 right away. And after, say, d takes c, bishop takes, castles, I think that Black has a very reasonable game here. For instance, White can play b4, using the fork trick on queen a4 check to protect the pawn. So the pawn cannot be taken, but Black in this position can drop back to b6, and I think this is a very reasonable diagonal because White's pawn structure in the center is rather shaky. He's got this pawn on e3 not defended by anything, and the d3 pawn's not defended by anything either. I can see how later in the game White's center might come under a lot of pressure. So this is a slightly improved version of the Horowitz because if White allows the pawns to be doubled, Black has c5 right away. So what if White drops back to e2 here with his bishop? Well, the move bishop to f5 is prevented, so Black cannot play that move as he does in the Horowitz. But after c3, the black knight needs to drop back somewhere, so Black can create a space for it by playing c5, and now c3, knight c6. And now what White would like is to move the bishop back to d3, and after knight to f6 he plays knight to d2, and now we've reached the mainline Stonewall. But after bishop to d3, Black has another option. He can play f5, creating a double Stonewall, and the bishop doesn't make a lot of sense on d3 when there's a pawn on f5. So let's say White tries to trick his way into the Stonewall main line by playing knight to d2. Now if knight f6, then bishop to d3, and we've reached main line. I suppose that black can play f5 here as well, but I think that queen c7 is a bit more flexible. This sets up a threat of pawn takes pawn on d4, because against the positionally correct capture e takes d4, white would lose a pawn on f4. For instance, knight to f3, pawn takes pawn, and now white would like to take back with this pawn, but now queen takes on f4, and this is a position I will analyze later in the series. So c takes prevents the loss of the pawn on f4, but after knight b4, black has a big-time initiative. For instance, knight c2 cannot be prevented, and if castles, then knight c2, rook b1, knight takes e3 wins an exchange. Now, rook b1 is possible, because the a pawn is immune, because queen a4 check picks up a piece. So instead, rook b1 should be met by knight c2 check, and now the king goes up to f2 to defend the e pawn, and now knight to c6, preparing knight g4 check with the attack on e3, and now say white guards that by playing h3. Now we still have a game of chess, but it seems to me like black is very much dictating the tempo of play. For instance, he can play bishop d7, rook c8 to dominate the c-file. So I definitely trust black's position in this line. So knight to f3, not a very good move. Knight d to f3 is not much better, because then black just plays knight f6, followed by knight e4, occupying white's weakest square on e4. So I think actually here the best move might be knight to h3, which protects the f-pawn and also prepares castling. So I think that a reasonable approach against this, well, the double Stonewall is reasonable here too, but I think that knight to f6 castles bishop to d6, possibly followed by bishop d7 and castles queenside a la Teichmann. So that is why I don't recommend the white's attempt to reach a Stonewall with the bishop on e2. So other moves, c3 is surprisingly weak, because black can play e5 even though the e-pawn has moved twice. Captures leads to nothing for white, as usual. Black's central position makes up for his loss of tempo. Now, bishop to b5 is an interesting try, because if pawn to e4, then pawn to c4 reaches a reversed color when now we're French. But white is not up a tempo, because his bishop has moved twice to go to b5. So if you're a French player who happens to play the Stonewall for white, this I think is the move order you would want to use. Perhaps black will get psyched out and play passively because he has the wrong color of pieces. f4 I think is a bad move, because e4 locks the center, and then after f5, black can maintain his giant pawn wedge. For instance, knight h3, knight to e7, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, and black has the perfect defense. So c3 is a weak move. Knight f3 is a move I analyzed against this, because against knight to b4, black may have other moves, but knight to b4, bishop to e2, c5, and now white can play a3 instead of c3, with the idea of reaching a reversed color, Queen's Gambit accepted. After bishop takes, b4, bishop d6, bishop b2, attacking g7, so knight f6 and castles kingside, with a future pawn to c4 to attack the black center. This, I think, is white's most aggressive path I've analyzed so far against the Teichmann defense, this reversed Queen's Gambit accepted. Now, queen a5 check, you might ask, why can't I just check and then take with the queen? Well, b4 And now knight takes, and instead of pawn takes, which would lose the rook on a1, white has bishop to d2. Now you may think, okay, this just wins a piece on b4, but after bishop takes it's a little more complicated than that, because bishop takes is a bad move due to the pin on the pawn on a3. But pawn takes, queen takes, pawn takes bishop, and white has an overwhelming position, with a key threat being bishop to c3 to win the pawn on g7, and therefore winning the rook. So this is an equal material position, but black is losing, because white just has too many threats. Black is completely undeveloped. Well, thank you for watching this presentation on the so-called Teichmann defense to the Stonewall. I'll talk about more in the future.